And you're also not going down the rabbit hole of, God, I'm such an idiot. I left my coffee in the microwave again. I always do that. I'm so forgetful, right? To that story. And you're just being present with the emotion. I think for me, it's very useful to separate the emotion from the story that I'm telling myself.
Spring coaching groups are just around the corner. If you missed our spring registration kickoff event, don't worry. We've got another one coming up next week on Wednesday, February 28th at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. Head on over now to coachingrewired.com to get started with your pre-registration process. Because even though the new year has passed, it doesn't mean it's too late or too early to get started. That's coachingrewired.com to get your name added to our spring interest list so you can join us next week on Wednesday, February 28th at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern for our next spring registration event. More about our award-winning coaching and accountability groups at the break. And now, on with the show. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD reWired. I am happy to welcome back to the podcast my friend and ADHD coach, Dana Cruz. Hey, Dana.
Hi, Eric. How are you today?
It's been a morning. It has been a morning. Yeah. Starting out, I had the plan to. So my girlfriend and I, we are starting therapy together. We have an appointment at 3:00, and it's snowing here. The weather's pretty bad in the Chicago area, and so when she called me this morning to discuss a change in plans, my brain was not cooperating. And so this led to a little bit of a conflict.
Conflict. What an interesting topic, Eric.
So, which is, we're kind of joking about this now because this was the plan of what we were planning on talking about today. Because from our last interview, a conversation we had on the podcast, we were talking about, is it possible to be content with ADHD? And part of why we liked that conversation is because neither of us really had the answer, and we were still kind of in that exploration and kind of trying to figure it out. And we feel that today's conversation is probably going to be somewhat similar to that, because I think from a lot of the conversations that you and I have had, we both recognize and struggle with some similar things around conflict.
Yes, very true.
So should we start by do we have a definition for conflict?
Yeah, I think that's really great, because I was just talking to someone this morning about is conflict inevitable, or is it more like disagreement? Like, what even concepts come with the word conflict, right? Like conflict in the Middle East, conflict as in fighting between couples, conflict, so much, right? So many different aspects of conflict. But how I think of conflict is a difference in perspective or opinion, or even wants and desires. Like having conflict, not as in having to fight, but just having that disagreement, that conflict. What do you think of it? What do you think of conflict, the word?
Yeah, thinking about the difference between conflict and disagreement, and I feel like there's almost like a 3-dimensional Venn diagram.
I'm
where I feel if conflict, there's more emotion involved. I feel that there's more feels in conflict, or in disagreement. Part of it feels more like a logic disagreement, like a different in thinking, but that doesn't mean that disagreements are without emotion and conflict.
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think about how I show up to conflict and sort of how conflict was modeled for me growing up. And, I did not have the healthiest models for how to, effectively navigate conflict. I one parent who is often very emotional, and another who was very sort of passive aggressive, and was kind of would placate and just kind of backpedal, and I definitely took on that role. I discovered in my when I was in my marriage, where my ex was. It's funny because she knew and owned her own conflict avoidance, and so I thought for the longest time that we had this great relationship because we never fought. And it's like
Yeah.
it's like knowing what I know now. I look back at that. I was like,
Oh,
yeah,
whoops.
yeah. Like that's actually a big red flag if you're in a relationship
Avoiding
for you.
conflict.
Right.
Right. We don't want to avoid conflict, and yet we don't want to live in this overly reactive or overly aggressive or frustrated or lack of understanding, lack of anger or, all that resentment and things like that. So it's like, are people either in conflict often or are they avoiding conflict as often as possible? Right. It's not always one or the other, binary,
Hmm.
but how can we disagree, going back to that word, without that intense emotional state that, causes more dysregulation, right? Because with ADHD, we're already challenged by the emotional dysregulation itself. So that's, I guess, why I thought maybe this conversation and this topic would be helpful or useful. And I've been hearing it a lot, actually. Like Esther Perel now has her, master class on conflict. And even I was listening to someone interview the FBI expert, on like how to navigate conflict and
Hmm.
hostage negotiation, navigation, and
Well,
things like that.
and
So,
I also think conflict in a professional setting is feels
mm,
very different to me than conflict in personal relationships.
of course. And also parenting, different conflict. Like if I have a disagreement with my stepdaughter, right? And I'm like, well, this is what I think. And she's like, well, this is what I think. And I'm like, okay, it's okay to have this conflict. And what can we do about it? Right? Like, is there space for creative problem solving or some kind of resolution or common ground?
Yeah,
Or
and
are we, is it just going to erupt into a tantrum and and everyone's upset?
And I think there's so many different sort of permutations of how conflict can show up when there's one person in the relationship who has ADHD
Mm,
versus if there's or two, or is the
yeah.
conflict that is something that's directly like stemming from like part of the functional impairment from ADHD. Right, because like that's
Right.
like for me this morning, that's where it sort of stemmed from was I needed to make a shift in sort of the plan for the morning, and my brain was just like not cooperating. It was
Yeah.
intellectually, I knew what like I needed to do was not a hard thing, and
But the transition was difficult.
I also know like historically, like if I have not had my coffee yet or my meds yet, haven't had my breakfast
Mm,
yet, like
mhm.
being asked to adjust something in my schedule for the day, like
Mm.
it is this expression that I learned from social thinking, which is like it's a speech and language program for like uh, designed for people with social cognitive differences. And the idea of feeling it big and showing it small, or like what's the size of the
Mm.
problem, right? And like so intellectually, I know this is not a big problem. I know like, I just need to sit down and look at my calendar and like adjust,
Right.
like look to see what I can adjust that way. Emotionally,
Mm.
this feels
Mhm.
like you're asking me to like sell my child for like
Right.
for nothing. Like it's
This
like
is our nervous system reaction, right?
yes.
This is where emotional dysregulation stems from, right? It's like we're in that fight or flight or freeze moment of like, oh my God, there's a tiger. And what do I do?
Yeah, and it's interesting too because with in my relationship we've been together for coming on 7 months, and we both have diagnosed complex PTSD from stuff from our childhood and growing up, and we're both very sort of actively navigating how do we heal from that? How do we identify like, when sometimes like the things that are maybe triggering for me or part of my ADHD are triggering for her, and then vice versa. And how do we navigate that? Because it can feel at times like a perfect storm. And we also know like no one's like at fault for anything here. It's just like these are these strong feelings that we're both having to kind of feel navigate. one of the things that I had shared with her, because she shared that she was upset because I wasn't able to respond as quickly as she was really wanting and needing, because it was a train schedule. And so it was like, because I wasn't able to give her that response as quickly as I needed to, or that she needed, it delayed the plan. So then she was sort of upset that I wasn't responding quickly. But that also stems from some of her background of having parents who were sort of under responsive to certain things.
Mm.
So it's like, yeah, I intellectually we get it, right?
Right.
And then
Our
so
behavior is based upon the patterns, right? And all of our experiences. And then we relive those experiences and those patterns, even though we're not actually living in that moment.
right, right. And so like
We're living in the past or we're living in the future.
mm, and for me, like one of the because there's been a couple times where I'm like kind of feeling like she wasn't understanding my ADHD and how it was showing up, and so and she generally is trying to understand that more. But what I explained to her is that like I feel like asking me to like respond so quickly was kind of like, yeah, I need your help. I know you're in a wheelchair, but just come up to the first flight of stairs, please. Or it's just like, yeah, I wish I could. Right. And then
See,
so
that's the thing is I don't know. I feel like we don't have to agree with the person's perspective. And I think this is the important part of conflict, right? Is like it's not about what we're disagreeing about, it's about how we disagree,
right. And
right? And so can we improve like the quality of our life by improving the quality of our relationships by, you know, reducing harm, right? And being in sustainable, healthy, of course, relationships. And is this inevitable or unavoidable conflict? Is there a way to like you keep on using the word navigate? I love that word, right? Is there a way to navigate through this that allows for different people's perspectives and still emotional regulation and nervous system like downshifting and mindful moments and taking a pause and taking a breath and recognizing that we're not in the past and that we're right here, right now.
And I think I don't know how it is for you, Dana, but like one of the things for me that I've been working on in my own EMDR therapy is that just that sitting with and holding space for somebody
Mm.
else's strong emotions, right? And I
Yes.
said before, like on a professional level, like I have no problem with that. Like I think
No
I'm
problem.
actually really good at that, right?
Yeah.
But like
But
when
in intimate relationship,
it's so much
it's
harder.
so much harder. And I think, at least this is my perspective and experience right now, is that I just want to feel heard and
Mm.
understood.
Yes.
Like, you don't have to agree with me. I just want to feel heard and understood.
Have you seen? There's a video. So I think it was on Instagram or YouTube. It's this couple, and it's like they're kind of like poking fun at this idea of like holding space for each other. So
Mm.
the woman is like, I'm holding space. She's like literally like has her hands out like she's holding like a log, but like nothing in her hands. Like, and then the guy is doing it. And then he's like, I'm holding space. And the woman's like, no, you're doing it wrong. You don't. I was like, no, my hand. And so like his hands are like out doing like the same thing she was
That's it,
doing.
though. That's what we end up disagreeing and arguing and fighting over is actually not the conflict itself or the disagreement itself. It ends up being these layers on top of layers on top of layers, right? Is like our emotions get caught up in the story. And then there's the second arrow, right? The concept of like it's enough that we disagree, but we're layering on top of that more suffering because we're upset we're disagreeing or because why do we always have to disagree or
Or what about like that to me, that kind of like a gut wrenching feeling of because of something related to my ADHD, like it has had a negative impact on somebody, and like
yeah, yeah.
it's interesting because when she was relating a story to me about something with a former roommate, and she, said, yeah, I made a mistake and she made a mistake. And so what I heard was she was equating my delayed reaction and response to figuring
Mm.
out a new plan as a mistake. And I told her, I'm like, I know this isn't what you were saying, but what it feels when you to me, like when you were saying that, was that I am a mistake. And like that,
Mm.
and so it's that,
And that's powerful that you were able to be vulnerable in that moment and say that.
and I prefaced
Did you
this.
get the kind of response that
I
you
I
wanted?
did, because part of it too is I was like, I'm really trying to be mindful about not being defensive,
Mm.
because I think that's something that I have been like I'm working on, and I think and because of I think the EMDR therapy that I've been doing this for the last feels like forever, um, like it has allowed me to like create space between like holding someone's emotions for something that stems from me but isn't
Yeah.
necessarily like I
Yeah.
don't need to defend myself. I just need to acknowledge her
It's the
feelings. And it's
Yes,
so
it's the Viktor Frankl quote of, between stimulus and response, right? There's that space.
it's just so hard. It really is. It's to
Yeah, life
especially when
is
someone's
difficult and stressful and challenging, and we're so hard on ourselves, right? And then we've got
hmm
those blind spots where like, can we even trust this view that I have of myself? Like, am I being unreasonable? Am I over or under reacting? Right? Can I make space for this other person's perspective? Can I can I just have empathy or compassion, for this other person that I love? But
right.
in the moment there, I'm so right and you're so wrong or whatever it is, right?
Yes, and it's sort of this yes and kind of thing
Mm.
where it's like, yes, I can be
Right.
mad at you and I also love you. It's like,
Yes.
which is it's hard.
It's why it's helpful to be close together, proximity, like physical, and if you can touch someone while you're, being in conflict, it's helpful to be less reactive.
Yeah, I'll tell you that when we first started dating, I shared with her that anytime there was a little bit of a disagreement or a conflict, and like minor stuff too, like my brain immediately goes, "Oh, here it comes. She's about to dump me." And like that's what was my automatic like thought about like, oh, if like
Mhm.
this person is upset with me, like it's about to be over. And she did something for me that really I think like it shifted something in me that showed me something that I'd never experienced before. It was always like, oh, I've read about this. I've heard about this, but I've never actually experienced it. And it's the idea of turning towards, comes from Gottman, like turning towards
Yes.
your partner when you're in conflict. And she just kind of
Mhm.
modeled that so beautifully for me, and
Mm.
which then like brought me to tears because I was like, I've never had someone do this for me before. And
There was an unmet need
yeah,
that you had. And instead of the isolation and the separation that comes with high conflict, right? The escalation and frustration and again resentment or anger, she
right.
actually saw there was a need and she stepped towards that.
Yeah,
That's
because
beautiful.
historically, like I backpedaled. I was a backpedaler. Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
I'd bring up an issue, it would cause, my partner to get upset, and then I would backpedal on it. And then it would
Mhm.
just sort of ingrain the into that resentment piece of like I'll say I'm
Mhm.
feeling one way when I'm really not. And so like I've been much more able to kind of stay on my ground without being an asshole. It's my
Gentle
goal.
strength.
Gentle strength.
I like to think of the deer, the symbol of the deer, because, you know, the strength and yet very gentle.
Hmm. Yeah. So that holding space when there's
Yeah.
disagreement on perspective. How do
Well,
you?
you have to be listening too, right? Like there has to be a component of listening, right? Active listening or parrot talking. You could mimic in some way. Like you have to repeat what a
Mhm.
person is saying. Otherwise, you're in your own head. I mean, we're all in our own head so much, right? Like again, that we're not really even present. Okay, so coming back to mindfulness practice or meditation practice is utilizing the present moment instead of following the thoughts of the past or the future, but really being present and actively listening and engaging and, being empathetic, turning towards or touching or in some way that helps ground us, right? In those senses too, to be present. to be in the present.
And you said like saying back to your partner what they're saying. And I feel like that's that. And I try to do that. I don't know how this is for you, but like sometimes when I get triggered, something around my own trauma is like the language part of my brain kind of goes somewhere else, and it can be really
Mm.
hard to do that. Like, what do you do in that kind of situation?
Yeah. Well, it kind of backfires on me. I'm just thinking about my stepdaughter and I'll like try to validate her feelings. Like, I understand that you're frustrated that we're not going to be able to do this thing. And she gets so angry that but I'm validating your feelings. I don't understand. It's like, so yeah, that's difficult. It's sometimes language, if she doesn't recognize what's happening, she's only 9. So, but if she doesn't recognize what's happening inside of her, then even trying to validate with language, sometimes language is lost on us. Sometimes language doesn't even do the thing that we want it to do. And yeah, I sometimes I say something comes out of my mouth, and as soon as I say it, I'm like, that's not what I meant. And I have a very good friend that she says, to her partner, like, can I say something out loud? And can we just see how it lands?
Mm.
And I love that. I love that idea because to me, that could be really helpful because I don't know how it lands until I say it out loud sometimes.
Right.
I don't even know how it lands for me.
And like for me as like a verbal processor, I sometimes don't know what I'm fully thinking until I speak it.
Exactly.
And that is the idea of how it lands. It's like I say it out loud. It's like, no, that's actually not
No.
quite. So I think that's
Yeah,
that preface
exactly.
piece. And I think this comes from the book Crucial Conversations, the idea of like stating what your intent is and stating what your intent isn't.
Yes. I think that's so this is really great in terms of conflict. Is like, what is our intention and what is our goal? Right? Is a goal to be right? Is a goal to be heard? Is a goal to be understood? Is a goal to come to a resolution or a compromise? Like, what is the goal? Is like I keep asking you, right? Do you want to be, what do I keep
The three
asking you in the
H's.
text?
The
The three H's.
do you want to be heard, hugged, or helped?
That's right.
Which I love that. Like I really do because it's like I, I think when I was messaging this morning, I was like, yes.
All of the above. D, all of the above.
Yes.
Yes. Well, and I think that the key, I think, in terms of conflict is like, can we get to a place of collaboration and connection and building trust and community, whether it's family or partnership or even like in a work situation, right? You're going to come across a boss or a coworker that you're having some conflict with, right? And is there openness and curiosity around that collaboration or that connection? Like, is that the goal, right?
Mm.
Or is it, no, I need to be right. They need to listen to me or whatever, you know.
Yeah, for me, one of the things that I've been really learning is that when I have that, my like immediate reaction is this feeling of, oh, she's just not understanding because I'm right. And
That's right.
that's
Yes.
one of
Mhm.
the sort of the keys for me to slow the fuck down, take a breath,
Yes.
pause. Like
Yes.
if I can, just take a little break. Step away from it if
Yes.
possible. Yeah,
That's part of
it's
nonviolent communication, right? Sometimes you do need a break, right?
yeah. I mean, I remember growing up and when I had conflicts with my mom, like, and I would be so flooded, and I would like go want to like lock myself in my room, and she would literally follow me and like
Oh,
be like making me have this conversation that I was not in any position to have. So like, it kind of made sense that why I was in a marriage for over a decade that was like
ah,
the appeal of a conflict free like relationship like makes sense. But
right.
it's like, but how binary is that? It's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's either because you can have relationships that aren't like that are it's not that it's conflict free. You can also have relationships that aren't always volatile. Like it's I think
Hmm.
what's healthy is in the middle of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what you said there with the pause, even just for the moment, if you need to take a break, great. I tend to want to like walk or ride my bike or do something like super active or activating, because it's sort of like I'm up here and I need to do something to match that in order for me to kind of reduce, that or downshift my emotional state or reduce that nervous system reactivity. But I think what you said without saying it was that non-judgmental awareness, like just again, being in the present, being able to see what's happening, not judging it, being aware of what's happening. And then we can ask ourselves like, oh, is this a pattern of my behavior? Oh, is this related to something that's happened in the past? Or, oh, am I disproportionately, over or under reacting to this situation? Right. And you can kind of turn those questions inward too in the moment without judgment, without criticism, without shame, without guilt, without,
Mm.
because then we're just causing more conflict in ourselves.
And one of the things that it's been really nice to experience with my partner is like it seems like every time we have some kind of conflict and then resolution, like we genuinely feel so much closer and connected to each other.
Yes, absolutely. I definitely feel like that with my husband. Is like, I know that when we have the conflict, no matter what, we're going to feel more connected and
Mm.
more collaborative afterwards. I mean, is there space for some kind of creative problem solving? I would like, right? I'm a problem solver. I tend to jump there a little too often, right? That's why helping is the third H, Eric. But I tend to do with that
Uh,
as the first, and it's not helpful, especially when it comes to a husband or a stepdaughter. Yeah. It's like, oh, wait, they didn't ask for my help, but I'm jumping in to help here.
yeah, that's definitely something that I have learned is because I might have that tendency a little bit too. And so like I'll ask like, do you want me to just listen or so yeah, the heard part. So but I like the hugged part.
Yeah. Sometimes we just need the physical touch, right? From someone else
Hmm.
or ourselves.
Mm. We do need to take a really quick break. So let's do that. Unless you have any disagreements with me about that.
No, break is good.
Okay.
I support your break, Eric.
Okay. Okay. It's like I was trying to start a conflict or something. It's not like anyone with ADHD would ever do that. Let's talk about that when we come back from break. We will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from ADHD Rewired's coaching and accountability groups. We are just over halfway through our winter season of coaching groups, which means the clock is ticking until our spring season of coaching groups begins. Learn more and get on our spring interest list at coachingrewired.com. If you want to discover ADHD-friendly ways to plan your days and weeks, become more aware of where you are really spending your time, if you want to create actionable to-do lists that reflect your intentions, and do all of this and more with other adults with ADHD just like you, and we'd love to have you join us. Get your name added to our spring interest list at coachingrewired.com. Once you've added your name, you'll receive an invitation to start your pre-registration process so you can join us next week for our next spring registration event on Wednesday, February 28th at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 Eastern. If there's one promise that I will always make, is that at the end of these 10 weeks of our coaching groups, if there's one promise I can make, it's that you'll still have ADHD after the 10-week coaching group. But that doesn't mean the support ends there. Our members have continued their personal group journey with our amazing alumni coaching community. Because while learning new things can be challenging, but still fun and exciting, maintenance is hard. So whether it's revisiting our to-do lists, remembering our successes, time blocking our calendars, or being reminded of our routines, we won't have to do any of this alone. So don't wait. Head on over now to coachingrewired.com to get your name added to our spring interest list so you can join us next week for our upcoming spring registration event on Wednesday, February 28th at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 Eastern. That's next week on Wednesday, February 28th, and that's coachingrewired.com to get started. What are you waiting for? Growth happens here. That's coachingrewired.com. All right, we are back. All right, so there's a phrase that I don't remember where I first heard this, but I love this. And when I would present, especially to to school districts and stuff around kid issues, I would often use this. And it's the idea that arguing with a kid with ADHD is like mud wrestling a pig. You both get dirty, but only the pig enjoys it. Because arguing is stimulating for the brain.
Yes.
And I
Yes, it is.
and I think sometimes that when
Mm,
our kids anyways, or maybe ourselves as when we were kids, like that arguing often is
mm.
is just a we're looking for ways to stimulate the brain. Um
Yeah,
I don't
that's a really good point.
I don't think that I
Mm,
do that anymore. I definitely did as a kid. What do you think for
mhm.
yourself?
Hmm, that is a good question. I think I found stimulation in other places, although I was definitely like a an angsty teen, and I constantly apologized to my mother for like taking it all out on her, because she's a saint. I mean, she's amazing, generous and loving and kind and patient and wonderful. So
Hmm.
it's her birthday today, by the way. Happy birthday, Penny.
Happy birthday, Penny.
But I heard this is interesting that you brought up like the chemicalness of stimulation because I had heard that feeling understood or feeling heard also can stimulate like norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. So is that the like answer for kind of conflict resolution or de-escalation?
That would make sense because it was interesting in the conversation that my partner and I were having this morning. One of the things I said to her is, I think that I probably would have had a maybe a bit better of a
Mm,
response if it were presented to me as I know like making shifts to your schedule, your routine is really hard for you, especially before you've had your meds and coffee. But I'm wondering if is there any possibility of us making this
mhm,
quick shift because the train's on the schedule and I would need to know now. And almost saying if you can't, I understand. And for me, it's always
mhm.
as soon as I don't feel the obligation, it makes it actually easier for me to engage in the way I really want to. Right. It's like
Yeah.
that obligation piece freezes my brain because then I'm like, I don't want to do the wrong thing. So
Mhm.
and it was what was interesting is after I picked her up when we were talking about this and we were talking about this idea of masking, and I told her that I was actually masking a bit during that because we were on FaceTime while I was kind of getting my breakfast together, and the way my masking took form was I was just silent. I just didn't say anything. I was
Mm,
because what I was really trying to do is manage what I was feeling internally, which was that I wanted to just kind of have a meltdown. Right.
mhm,
And but I knew this was so out of proportion.
mhm.
So that was so interesting what you said about, being seen and understood. Because I do think that if it were presented that way, I would have felt more seen and understood and probably could have responded in a way that would have been more helpful in that moment.
Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of people with ADHD, right, we tend to, like, fall into, unfortunately, unhealthy relationships that are highly stimulating or highly traumatic or, and they can lead, obviously, to emotional abuse or other abuse, and I wanna make sure that, we're not talking about navigating conflict in an abusive relationship, right? Like, we're not saying that that's okay
Yeah, that's
or
a good point. I'm
inevitable.
glad you said that.
But how can we know that we need that stimulus and still get it from somewhere else that is healthy and sustainable, um, without it being a detriment or destructive, to ourselves or to the people that we love? Because we know that like stress kills, right? I mean, medically, like we know hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, right? Stress is like the number one killer. And we know that relationships can be a part, stress can be a part of relationships, right? And whether that's with your children, I mean, I work with lots of families with teenagers and college students that, it's constant conflict, right? And so where is that building of the relationship or building of the trust? And how can we still have the conflict and still know that like we love each other, there is trust, there is connection, and yet we can have disagreement without that highly stimulating reactivity.
Mm. So what do you do when you're in the throes of it? When you are recognizing that
Mhm.
you're you're getting hijacked, like you're just emotional, everything is, the amygdala is going, "Oh, my turn."
Mhm. Yeah. I do my best to stay present.
And when
I'm
you
not
aren't
great
able
at it
to,
all the time. Having difficulty lately.
well, come on, Jade. I
Um,
think I've been very vulnerable in this conversation so far.
I know.
Let's
I
share
go,
let's share some of your mess too. Come on.
yeah, I know. Well, so yeah, not everybody knows this, but I'm a widow, but I am newly married recently. And I do have stepchildren that are older, but this new marriage, I have, yeah, a young stepchild. And so sometimes my husband and I, we just disagree on how to handle things. And there's the conflict, right? And so, because we both want the same thing, we know that our intention and our goal is the same. And yet, how to get there is different, right? So, yeah. If I'm completely hijacked, I have to walk away. I sometimes just leave the house. I go on a walk. I take the dog. I go on a bike ride. Um,
Is there an
if I, c-
understanding in that, like, a, a conversation that has happened like a beforehand or previously, that's like when, like, just this acknowledgement that that's your go-to when you're flooded or when it's coming too much for you?
boundaries are set. Expectations are laid. Absolutely. Like I'm not leaving you. Our relationship is safe. Um, it's just, this is what I need in order to calm down. Like I am just too much right now.
And how do
And
you
I
make
want
sure
to
you come
love
back?
myself and care for myself and take care of that emotion too.
How do you make sure you come back to the conflict? Because I think that's like one of the things I
Yes.
see in with relationships and a lot of clients that have worked with in the past, where it's like they get flooded and they need this break, but then it's like the partner says, yeah, they need the break, but then they don't come back to like resolve this.
Right.
And so it's like from
Right.
the ADHD perspective, it's like, how do we make sure we are honoring
Yeah.
that? Like, yes, like I need a break and I'm going to come back when, to talk about this when I'm ready.
Right. Yes. Give me a half an hour. Repair. I mean, that's, I coming back, and there's the possibility of creative problem solving there, but if it then erupts or starts to erupt again, walking away again, or, call any kind of calming grounding exercises or breathing exercises are really helpful to me. Um, but yeah, I think it's about, you know, hey, I want to understand your perspective. I love you. I care for you. You mean the world to me. And I'm feeling unheard, or I'm feeling, you know, not seen, or I'm whatever it is, right? The I statements, right?
Right.
you know, Again, part of nonviolent communication. So
So it's not a I feel you are horribly wrong.
no, it's not that. It's there's a Buddhist practice called Tonglin, and there's one slogan that says turn all blames into one. And it's actually very beautiful in terms of how can I see what role I have to play in this?
Mm.
The one is me, is the self, right? Is the ego. How can we Hulk smash that in a way that's opening and vast and compassionate? Again, not blaming myself, not criticizing myself, but like, what's my role in this? Right. Again,
Mm.
going back to intention or goal, like my goal is to tell you I care and love for you, and I am here, and we are safe. And how to come back to that conversation is tricky. There's no easy answer to that, especially when you're working with a child, because, you know, they're like, that's gone. What are you talking about, Dana? Like I never got upset. Right?
Well, yeah, because it is funny. And the flip side of it is like, it's, I guess, one of the curious, sometimes good things about ADHD is that like
Sometimes.
sometimes is that like we can sometimes move on like
Yeah.
surprisingly quickly, like where it
Yeah.
almost seems like we don't care, but it's just like, oh, it's like our working memory is no longer holding on to what had happened an hour ago because we got engaged in
Yeah.
something else and now we've moved on.
Yeah. And because we know that it was disproportional in some way, either over or under, right? That like we're like, oh yeah, that doesn't feel that way now. Right. And that's again then going back to the practice, the present moment practice is like really discovering and uncovering and being playful with what's happening right now. Instead of our thoughts or perception or the story that we're telling ourselves. I mean, that's the tricky part is, not following that rabbit hole.
Mm. I think we need to follow a rabbit hole to another break. So we're going to do that and we will be right back. In a world where tasks pile up like mountains and procrastination lurks around every corner, one app dares to stand against the tide of forgetfulness and delay. Introducing the Guilt Trip Planner. Forged in the fires of regret and powered by the whispers of your disappointed ancestors, the Guilt Trip Planner is your personal motivator in the palm of your hand. Simply input your tasks, deadlines, and deepest fears, and watch as the Guilt Trip Planner crafts the most emotionally compelling notifications to keep you on track. Because nothing says motivation like a good old-fashioned guilt trip. Woo! Ding! Your grandmother would have finished that project by now. Featuring our cutting-edge disappointment dynamics algorithm. Each reminder is tailor-made to pierce straight to the heart. From your future self's already mad at you to even your pet is judging you. We find the guilt that works for you. Oh my God, this is so bad. But wait, there's more. Upgrade to the premium service and you'll receive live guilt-tripping calls from actors posing as your ancestors. Hear the disappointment in their voice as they ask you, why haven't you cleaned the bathroom yet? And for those moments where you've actually completed your task, enjoy the sweet sound of silence as our app begrudgingly admits you've done well. Before reminding you of your next looming deadline, the Guilt Trip Planner. Because sometimes all you need is a little push over the edge. Download now and start feeling bad about feeling good today. Visit guilttripplanner.com and enter the code Sorry Not Sorry. No, actually, don't go. And I don't even know if that's a real website. And this is one of those apps that's made up, and thank goodness it is. Because this app isn't real. But you know it is real? That we here at ADHD reWired believe in shame-free support and accountability. So we can let go of the guilt and shame about our to-do list and find everything that we do here at ADHD reWired at ADHDrewired.com. You can co-work with us at our Adult Study Hall community. You can join our coaching groups. You can join us on Patreon and so much more. Find all that we do at ADHDrewired.com. All right, we are back. We have about 10-ish more minutes here. There's so many things that I still want to kind of touch on in this conversation.
What comes to mind?
The idea of when patterns, conflicts, or the way the conflicts are occurring as a pattern behavior, the idea of stepping out of the content of the conversation and focusing on the way communication is occurring. Because otherwise, it's like what the issue often becomes is about how we're communicating versus whatever the initial conflict was. And I think it's important to be able to separate those two things.
So how do you do that, Eric?
Well, I think as part of what we were kind of saying is like, start mindfully noticing how we're feeling. Um,
Hmm.
so whether it's, so let's say whether it's a friend, a partner, a work colleague, they come at you with some grievance, right?
Hmm.
And let's say this grievance, for whatever reason, whether it's the way they said it or your own internal stuff that makes it feel bigger than what it is, you're feeling yourself getting flooded. Or you're feeling yourself like wanting to get in the high defense. Being able
Hmm.
to say like I hear what you're saying. I'm feeling very defensive right now with what you just brought to me. I'm wondering if we
Hmm.
can either not do this right now or if we can come back to this later. Or I'm trying to think of like a scenario. Let's say someone would like barge into my office, which this doesn't actually happen, but I'm just thinking of scenarios that might be relatable. Um, and so someone barges into my office because I left my coffee in the microwave again.
Hmm.
Right. And they're so annoyed if you're doing that. Okay. Again, I'm actually making this all up. Um, Stepping out of the content would be about we're not talking about that I left the coffee in the microwave. We're talking about that you barged into my office right now.
Right, right. And you're also not going down the rabbit hole of God, I'm such an idiot. I left my coffee in the microwave again. I always do that. I'm so forgetful, right? To that story. And you're just being present with the emotion. I think for me it's very useful to separate the emotion from the story that I'm telling myself.
Say more about that.
Yeah, so I've started to use this new app and it's actually called How We Feel.
Mm,
And it's research based. Universities, they have videos and it's this really great, you check in multiple times a day. They have the words that they define the words. So it's a very useful in terms of identification. And I feel like for me, if I can just tune into the emotion itself, it feels more like raw and in the moment. It's like, oh, the emotion is frustration. Okay. But the story I'm telling myself is, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. I left now I'm getting defensive because you came into my office to tell me about the coffee that I already, damn it, I forgot to drink the coffee because I want the caffeine, but also I feel bad, right? That I left the coffee. And so then it becomes that shame, guilt spiral, right? But like if I can go back to the emotion and say, oh, I'm feeling frustrated. What does frustration feel like in the body, right? Where does it live? Does it live in my gut? Does it live in my shoulders? Right? Could I even like ask it to take on a shape or color? Like get granular, like lean into the emotion. Because I
mm.
think so often we like push away emotion and we start with the story we're telling ourselves. And that's what we tell someone else.
And I do love that line, which I think I first heard in is it Rising Strong, Brene Brown's book. The
Mm,
story I'm telling myself is because I think it really is a
yes,
very disarming way to start a conversation. Because instead of saying like,
exactly.
you did this on purpose, even if you say like, the story I'm telling myself is you did this on purpose,
Yes,
right? Like you just put
yes,
that right in front of it, and it's suddenly like you're now hedging, right? Like okay,
yes.
like this is what the thought I'm having, but I'm also owning and acknowledging this is a story. And I want you to know the story
Yeah.
that's in my head. So the emotions I'm telling you I'm feeling are making sense.
Mm-hmm. And imagine if every time we came into a disagreement or a conflict, we started with, okay, let's identify the emotion and then let's identify the story we're telling ourselves.
What if you're working with someone who genuinely has a really hard time being able to identify their own emotions?
We work on that, we practice it, and we do it as much as possible.
How do you help people
And I
practice?
encourage them to do that, encourage them
Yeah.
to do it
How do you
in
help
real
people?
time,
How do you help people practice recognizing emotions?
as I did with you just then. Like, okay, so let's take out the emotion wheel or let's take out this app and let's actually identify an emotion. And then where does it live in the body? What's the action that comes from it? What's the story I'm telling myself? You know,
Have you ever
lean in.
read the book by Paul Ekman, Emotions Revealed?
Hmm. Yes.
I think it's because I've used a lot of those principles when I used to work with a lot of clients with autism to help them become
Hmm.
more like cognizant of their own emotions and be able to better be able to recognize other people's emotions. And so it's this
Yes.
idea of understanding physiology of how emotions present on the face. And when
Mm.
we can like, literally look in a mirror and make the correct sequence of muscles on the face, it is able to then like close this feedback loop for recognition.
Yeah.
So this was something that I was doing that was kind of, taking some theory in one area and applying it to a different domain. And I saw really good
I love
success with
that.
it. Right. And
Yeah.
so much of that, there was this client I was working with who, like, when I first started, they were like in their 20s and, on the autism spectrum. And when I first started teaching these ideas to them, they're like, I don't recognize emotions. I can't do it. Like, they're very like resistant to this. And then within like a couple months of doing this with them, they like called me out on like a leak on my of an emotion. And I was like so
Mm.
excited that they're like, I was like, we're nailing it. Like, yes,
Amazing.
yes. So
Yes.
it was
Yes.
like,
And there's
yes, you
so
called me
much
out.
more that goes into communication other than what we say, right? Other than the language that we use, right?
Mm.
So it's like, can we kind of read the room in a different
Ooh.
way, right? Like, do we have to focus? And I think personally, the answer is no. But like, can we focus on something other than the language that they're using or what they're saying? Can we focus on their body language? Can we focus on their face or, their features of their face? Or can we focus on, maybe their intent behind what they're saying? Like kind of
I feel like we could
drop
have,
the mask of the actual language
I think we
there.
could have a whole conversation just about the nonverbal elements of communication and conflict. Because like I know I remember working with a client in my clinical practice. It was actually a couple, and they set up this like private blog for them
Mm,
just for themselves, and that's how they had
mm.
conflicts because they said it was
Wow.
too much for them to like do it in real time. So they
Yeah.
basically made these blogs, so it gave them time to process, to reflect on what the other person
Yes.
just said. They can organize their thoughts
Yes.
and respond. And I've even seen it where a couple will literally be in the same room together, texting to each
Texting.
other because it
Hmm.
allows them to kind of slow down and organize their thoughts.
Yeah, I've
Um,
done that before
and
with my
actually,
husband.
and yesterday, this is actually something that I was like, huh. So yesterday I had an EMDR session and I was getting kind of flooded. And I was like, my anxiety was kind of like up to about a 7 going up. And so like my brain was just like, I couldn't speak what was on my mind. Right. I couldn't use my words. Right. And so I had this phrase kind of repeating in my head, but like I was noticing I wasn't able to actually verbalize it. And so I
Mm.
grabbed the pen and I just wrote it down. And then I found like right after I wrote it down, I was able to say it. And so then my therapist, so you've done that a couple times where you seem to be kind of stuck. And then I noticed that you write something down and then it kind of frees something up that allows you to communicate what you're
Mhm.
you're thinking. And I'm like, yeah,
There's so many other ways to communicate. Temple Grandin has this great talk about that, thinking on other levels and other dimensions in terms of not just words, right? Like with numbers or pictures, and I think, I don't know, maybe terms of thinking on levels of emotion instead of the words, like what's the emotion behind the word that that person is saying? And can I pause, just take a moment, take a breath and say, oh, huh, what are they trying to convey here? Right?
no, that
What would
is
I want if I was them? How can I give them understanding?
it's interesting too because when in reflecting
Yeah.
back on this session yesterday, she was kind of reflecting back what she thought she was seeing in me, what emotions. And
Mm,
when she identified the right one, I felt it very strongly. Like I had that like
mhm. Gut
goosebump
reaction.
feeling. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So maybe kind of think like, I've used and I've seen those emotion wheels. I don't know if I've ever actually used one when I'm in a heightened state of emotion to know if it's
Oh,
yeah, it's like, huh. It's one of those like, how have I not done this before?
light bulb moment there. Yay. And cut.
Well, it's funny too because I've had this like cool little like hanger emotion wheel in my Amazon cart that I've been thinking about getting for my house, like for my
There you
son.
go.
I'm like, maybe this would help
Perfect.
me too.
Yeah. Well, so that's actually so when I work with families, like, upper teens and even college students, that collaborative piece and like understanding each other's perspective also comes with that emotion. It's like, how can we like, oh, you're feeling, let's not assume that someone is feeling a certain way, right? Let's ask like, oh, what's going on with you right now or what's happening for you, right? And just being able to use similar language, even if it's emotion, even if it's intent or goal, but being on the same page is really helpful in terms of, collaboration, connection, all that too, right?
Mm. There's like this part of me that's wishing this was like a live show right now so we can have people like sharing their comments and thoughts about this
That would be
conversation.
great.
Uh, okay, well, since
We need a
it's
part two.
right, so we can either do a part two, but I would love to just be able to hear from listeners about their thoughts on this conversation. What are some of the things that you all struggle with? What are some of the things that you have found that have been helpful for you, especially if they're like outside the box kind of ideas or things that you sort of stumbled on? We would love to hear about that.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you, Eric.
Any final thoughts that we should share before we end this one here?
No, I'm just happy to have this conversation with you.
Me too. This is really, I love the uncertainty piece of our conversations. The like we're genuinely exploring something that we're both kind of working through, and
Yeah.
it's because I think that vulnerability is my love language. So
Yes.
thanks for doing this with me, Dana.
Thank you, Eric. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Yeah, so I'm recording this after the conversation that I had with Dana and realized that I needed to actually cut this in. So without any further ado, here's a special announcement. ADHD reWired is excited to announce that we are now recommending podcast listeners who are interested in individual ADHD life coaching to Dana Cruz, the guest that you just heard on this episode. Throughout her 20-year career in coaching, education, facilitation, behavioral health, and social work, Dana has worked with hundreds of adolescents and adults with ADHD. She supports clients in creating and maintaining measurable and attainable goals through evidence and strength-based practices. Mindfulness is the foundation of Dana's coaching approach. She has been a practitioner of mindfulness, meditation, and yoga for over 20 years. To learn more about Dana and listen to her other podcast episodes, check out her profile page on the ADHD reWired website. Just click individual coaching under the coaching menu. And this, my friends, marks the end of this week's episode. A very huge thank you to Dana for having this conversation with me today. I really do appreciate it. Learn more and get in touch for some one-on-one coaching by going to our website at ADHDrewired.com, clicking on the coaching tab, and finding Meet Our Coaches. Want more from ADHD Rewired, like an uninterrupted listening experience of the show and bonus content from past episodes? Consider becoming a patron at ADHDrewired.com/Patreon at $5 a month or more. Need some accountability buddies to finally get your laundry done? Finish that last 10% of that project you've been putting off? Or just need some company while you're tackling your most dreaded tasks? Consider joining our ADHD-friendly body doubling and co-working community at adultstudyhall.com. Not sure what you want to check first? Well, you can find it all. Our coaching groups, Adult Study Hall, our free Facebook community, our Patreon community, and other ADHD Rewired events, all at ADHDrewired.com. That's ADHDrewired.com. And thanks again to Dana Cruz for joining me, and we will see you back here next week.